All right, here we go. All right. Well, welcome everyone to our free webinar live here on YouTube. I'm excited to be here with my partner in crime, Tricia Friedman. Tricia, it's good to see you this evening. Where we were just talking before we got started, it's really raining here in the Pacific Northwest. If you happen to be over here, it's just pouring outside. So fall is definitely in the air. And we're excited to be back doing some free webinars, hoping to live stream more of these on YouTube for everybody. As we get going here, I'm going to drop the link to the slide deck because there's always a lot of links that Tricia puts in her slide decks along with materials and stuff, and we'll see how that goes. So over in the chat, if you can get over there, there's the link that should open up the slide deck for you if you want to join us. We'll continue to put that in the chat as we go through today. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jeff Utecht. I am the CEO and founder of Shifting Schools, a little company that we got started right after the pandemic kind of started here in education to kind of support schools in the shift. And the shift is not over. The shift, I think, we'll continue to see, and we can talk more about that if you've seen anything that we do over at Shifting Schools. And my partner in crime, Tricia, joined us about last summer sometime. And so she's been an amazing help. A high school ELA teacher is her background, but I'll let her introduce herself as we get going today. We're talking about meaningful metaphors and why is this a moment and why are they so powerful in our classroom? So Tricia, awesome.
Thank you, Jeff. I know it's raining here, even though we're sort of a little bit of a body of water away. It's nice that we always have sort of the same-ish weather. So welcome everybody. Again, hopefully you've got the link to the slides. There are some takeaways from that link, so you'll want to make sure that you have that ready. We do have the sort of short code for that URL up here on the screen, so you can also get to it by going to gg.gg/metaphor for the moment. And the webinar really comes out of the free guide that we also have linked into these slides. And the free guide came about because we had a few fine educators like yourselves talking about the importance of collaboration and communication and ways that we go about really thinking about our team and our team's identity. And when Jeff and I are talking about teams this afternoon, that means anything really from your classroom. I think your cohort of students is a team, to your PLC, to your department, to your grade level team, or even just some of the organic teams that we make in schools. I found it's always been, there are maybe 3 or 4 people that you gravitate towards and you're sharing ideas with, or those were your sort of around the water cooler type of folks where you're exchanging ideas. And we know that teams are more important than ever before. Things are very difficult. And I think those networks, that's the support network is really the place that you're going to say, I need help with this. And I think if there's one thing that has come out of the pandemic, it's been the realization that when we ask one another for support, we often get pointed to resources that perhaps we wouldn't come across on our own. So this is a 45-minute session. And really the goal today is to help you experiment and to develop maybe a working draft for your team's metaphor for the moment, or even to look at the structure that we take you through and think about how you might use this, how you actually might take these slides and run through these slides with your team. That's the reason that we're giving you the slides. Take them, use them. We would love to know, how that thinking went, how that process went for your team. So that's why they are there to, again, hopefully help you experiment and develop that working draft. If you have something to write on and something to write with, anytime we're doing a free webinar, Jeff and I really pride ourselves on them, hopefully, being very practical, where you are actually going through and enacting the type of learning that you would bring to your team or to your students. So if you've got something to write on or something to write with, for the next few minutes, we are going to practice. My fellow dog owners out there, dogs love to use their nose to sort of find clues. And we are going to do the same thing, where we are just looking to find the scent of an idea. And I position it this way because I know sometimes in education, when we are doing rough draft work or rough draft thinking, we feel like there's so much pressure to just get the right answer. And this activity is more meant to just sort of, instead of focusing on, I've got to get it right, I have to hone in on the exact proper answer, to really just be open to some ideas and to experiment. So if you've got something to write on and something to write with, we're going to take you through a few different scent sprints. And if you like any of them, we've actually, when you tap on that toolbox there, they're in one location. So the ones that you like, we'd invite you to go ahead and use them again. The ones that you might not like, you can go ahead and ignore them. So if you've got that piece of paper and that pen or that pencil handy, without further ado, we're going to start with the first scent sprint, where you're just sort of experimenting, trying to come up with an idea. Because I know if I use this phrase, metaphorical thinking, for those of you who may not have a background in teaching languages, maybe that sounds intimidating, but really what it is just sort of engaging our creative thinking. So the first example is a 4 corners exercise. For Jeff and I on Pacific Standard Time, we are, sort of getting to nearish the end of the day. So as you reflect on your day, which corner or which side, and Jeff and I are going to talk to sort of the design of these scent sprints a little bit later on. It's intentional to say which corner or which side best describes your day and why. So those of you watching, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. Let us know which of these corners or which of these sides best sums up your day. And Jeff, I know that you love pizza, so I think we'll put you on the spot and invite you to share which of these sides or which corner best describes your Monday so far and why. You can take some more time to think about it, Jeff, if you need it.
No, I think that's pretty good. I don't know. I kind of I feel like it's Monday. And so I'm kind of like, I feel like it's the flipping pizza dough in the air type of days. Things are just kind of getting started for the week. So this idea of being able to just starting to, put systems in place and figuring out what needs to happen this week. I just feel like I haven't even started eating the pizza yet. That usually is like Wednesday or Thursday for you and I, but a lot of planning today. And so the idea of planning with my pizza dough is probably where I am this. How about you, Tricia? What corner do you fit in?
Well, it's funny, as you were talking it through, I realized I think that's my corner as well, because things feel kind of up in the air. On a Monday, it's seeing, okay, I think this is what's going to get done by Wednesday, but maybe not. But I think my initial reaction was the top left corner, just sort of like the cheese oozing, because I kind of think Monday, sometimes I feel that sense of pressure, like, let's hurry up and get started. So and for me, it's the same way with pizza. Like, you want to eat it when it's piping hot and it's delicious.
Yeah. And one of the things I like about, this metaphorical thinking like this, and in using a 4 corners activity like this, and, you use this one, this is a pizza theme, which of course we know would probably speak to every grade level of kids. And to have them be thinking about, how is my day being described in a pizza? What a great social, emotional learning kind of check-in with kids. It's fun. You could have them write it down. You could have them talk out loud. And the thing that really plays off this, every time that we do these, the things that I have to keep reminding myself, that one of the reasons why this is so popular and so good for the brain is because we're using visuals. The use of visuals gets the brain active in a different way. All the research that's coming out around neuroscience and how the brain works, visuals are so important. So using any kind of visuals like this in a nice theme, right? A pizza theme, or, we're coming up here, especially in elementary schools, we're coming up on Halloween. So there could be all kinds of Halloween things of like, what are you feeling like today? Just great check-in moments with kids on an SEL level. And I just love these little 4 corner activities.
And I sort of, what I also like, Jeff, is that it's not necessarily a question that feels like it's cookie cutter and, learners have heard it before, because, even as an adult, sometimes the whole like, hey, how was your day? It's like, do you really want to know? Or is it, is it just kind of a transactional thing? So that's the other piece for me, is I think when we give prompts like this, that they do value some creative thinking. students get that too. And it's a little bit of a, oh, this question is different.
Yeah. And I think also if you're doing this for the first time in your classroom, you have to prime students to be thinking this way. If you don't use a lot of metaphors, or you've never used a four corners activity like this with images, I think you can use this in every subject area, because it's all about the images or what you want kids to make a metaphor up. I mean, we're right now using this in a social emotional way in what is the best way to describe your day. But you could use this in math. You could use this in social studies. You could say, which one of these best describes a noun verb agreement to you? I mean, you can turn this into ELA and use the same photos. The thing is to remember that the first time you do this with kids, make it fun. Have something that is very low on the cognitive level scale so that they get used to thinking this way. I think one of the places where educators sometimes get in trouble is they take an idea like this. They're like, great, now I'm going to have them make a metaphor for US history between 1860 and 1865. And just like you go too high, and we haven't actually, prepared the brain to do that yet. So just something to think about. What's something fun, quick, easy, some laughter in your classroom? That something like this might help to support kiddos. So
absolutely. And so we're going to look at a few different ways of doing this, and also just look at some of the nuances in the direction. So this one again was, you could pick a corner or you could pick a side. Again, the side gives the students the opportunity to make the connection between the dough up in the air and the melting cheese, or, the remaining crust and the whole pie. Or again, it could have been top or bottom. So, again, just different levels of complexity with the question. So the next one, which of these four winter sports would best describe the start to the school year as you've experienced it so far? So again, we call these reflective sprints. And, Jeff, I love that you pointed out how you might go through this the first time. And I think anytime we're doing something the first time through, we've got to realize, okay, I'm introducing this as a process to students. So sometimes it's great to just model your own thinking around it, or even, let students know a few days in advance we're going to share this so that they can mull it over, and then really they've had that processing time. And I love, Jeff, too, that you talked about being responsive. So, I think where I am, the temperature feels like it's almost winter, but depending on where you are, winter sports might not actually be the theme
That's
that
true.
you would want to use. So, again, I find being as timely and as topical in your current context is also really, really useful.
Well, I think it's also a great time. It's a great place where, one of the things we talk about a lot is this idea of like, where am I inviting student culture into my classroom? And if you just listen to the conversations between kids at lunchtime or in the hallways, you can usually guess what is on their minds. Like, is it are they into Fortnite? Great. Can you go find 4 screen captures from Fortnite? Is it Pokemon? I know Pokemon trading cards is coming back, and so is Dungeons and Dragons. Like, if you listen to kids, you can then invite student culture back into your classroom, and you become kind of cool that way. When you get to take something that is truly relevant to this generation, and then use it. I like to say use it against them to make them use it in a thinking routine. Just something else, to your point, like winter sports might not be for everyone. So what is it? What do your kids are into, and how can you capture some of those images and maybe make a quick metaphoric slide or some kind of, something you can throw up on the board to have kids do some deep creative thinking around.
Yeah. And that's where, I often find doing surveys, having kind of ongoing surveys just to find out, like what are you into right now? What are you doing with sort of your free time? What is something that you're looking forward to? Obviously, yeah, it's great. Sometimes we can just sort of overhear and we can get a sense of that. But I do find for some students who are a little more introverted, just giving them multiple means to let you know what they're interested in so that you might use it for something like this. So moving on to the next one. The key distinction here is you're picking the metaphor, but also there's an ask that you go a little bit deeper and explain why in so many words, or I've done this where it's even just, 5 to 8 words, 1 to 2 sentences. This one is actually, I find, quite powerful for adult learners. Sometimes I think we don't reflect necessarily enough on how people feel communication is functioning or not. Especially, I think it's really important whenever we are in difficult times, like our current context. You don't necessarily want people to feel like they are overwhelmed by email or that they don't know where to go to find information. So, and this is some of the metaphors that are here. They're not necessarily like a direct line connection with communication. And that's intentional so that people are thinking, all right, the fruit basket, how can I connect to that? And then connect it back to our culture of communication. Am I going to play around with the idea of there's different flavors? Am I going to play around with, it's really fresh. We really have conversations around what's topical right now. So again, to me, that's the magic of metaphorical thinking. Is it really doesn't dictate where people go with conversation, but it lets them kind of tap into that imagination and then move forward.
I'm so glad that you pointed that out, because it doesn't have to be about communication, right? Like almost any image will work. I think the key to the image is it has to be something that people know, that you can quickly, you don't want to spend time going, what is that? Then you're too busy trying to decode the image and you're not spending the time to be creative in your metaphor. But to your point, like even when when we're going over this, I'm looking at them like, what am I going to do with a fruit basket? But you start thinking about just the process of thinking that sends you into of trying to make connections between content, trying to make connections in your own mind about where that might be is just critical. And I love the idea that if you were watching this and you're going through this, and you can download, again, any of these slides are here and available for you to use and take. And please do that. All of our resources are what we consider plug and play. We want to give them away so you can use them. But I'm also thinking, Tricia, like what a great way to start your team meeting or your PLC is using something like this. And it doesn't have to be this one, but maybe you don't know how to introduce this to your team. Maybe you're like, oh, this is really cool. Maybe you make one of these as part of your team meeting, and then you can debrief it, right? Like we're going to do this and then debrief it. What do we like? Do we think our kids would like it? What images would we want? Does somebody want to make one real quick? And I think that's the other thing I love about this. They're so easy to make. We're not talking about something that is like takes hours of time. You can do this in PowerPoint. You can do this in Google Slides. You need 4 images, a prompt in the middle, and you're set. It's so really quick and easy.
And once you've done this enough, I find you can really have a little bit of fun with it and invite students to create images that are going to be used in a future prompt like this.
Great idea.
And that's kind of, it's a nice little classroom culture building exercise, because of course, then students love seeing their sketches, their artwork included in these. So moving on, we have another 4 corners. Again, this one would be your understanding of leadership as it applies to learning. And again, we're asking, can you explain why you selected that metaphor in 10 to 15 words? And this one is actually one that I've used that works really well as sort of a partner dialogue. We've been running through these and talking about how you would use them with a whole class or a whole group. But I also find these can really be powerful as just sort of partner shares. And again, in my mind, that's the magic of saying, take a little time, think about your explanation in 10 to 15 words. And I always intentionally have that limit. Can you explain it concisely? That's the bit that's a little bit difficult and a little bit tricky. But I find, again, sometimes those limits are the things that lead to the creative thinking.
Well, I think the first person to capitalize on that was Twitter, right? Like what made Twitter so powerful when we're talking like back when you could only do 140 characters, is because you could only do 140 characters. Like there wasn't this idea that you could add tweets on top of tweets, right? It was, how do I get my message across in a text message? And so you could do that. Like, just know that when you're doing this, especially like this one is, and again, the thing I love about this is this works across, you can do this with kids, but you can do this if you're a superintendent or a principal, or you're working with your school board. You can do this same type of metaphoric thinking, and you can even change it. Instead of saying 10 to 15 words, do it in a tweet, do it in a text message, right? All of this, and to your point, that keep it short is another level of cognitive awareness and creativity, because you don't use full words, and that's okay. You can use the letter U to stand for you, because it's not about that, right? It's about making the connection. And so you can play with this, if you want to. You could even say, if you're dealing this with high school kids, it's the description to your Instagram photo. Mm-hmm. What a great way to put it, because it's limited, right? To, I think 220 or 240 characters on the description to an Instagram photo. So yeah, just so many great ways that, again, all the way from, you can be using these in schools with your school board. You can be using these with kindergartners. I mean, it just works because it's cognitive. It's based in cognitive science. So.
And the parent caretaker community too. And I know that's an audience sometimes that we might see just, at different pivot points throughout the year. And I'm bringing that up because a prompt like this is also really good to say, okay, we had this conversation. Maybe we collected some data. Maybe 75% of folks picked the drum kit. At the next meeting, let's return to this. Has that metaphor shifted for you? Why or why not? And playing around with what happened that, instead of being the drum kit, it's the ladder.
Yeah.
Again, it's just, I think sometimes when we're interacting with different communities and we're asking for feedback, I sometimes think when we just ask, how do you think we're doing as a leadership team? It's, I don't know how truly invitational that is, but sometimes I think if it's like, I have these two comparison points and I'm asked maybe to even tell a story of what that shift is about. In a way, again, I think when we demonstrate our creativity, it shows we care. And I think sometimes that gets people to share in ways that they might not if it's just hey, can you tell us how you think we're doing?
Yeah, I love that. I agree. And I think it just opens up way more conversations between people. And that's really what we want in our classrooms, right? We want conversations.
So moving on, and again, Jeff, I would love your thoughts on whether or not you think the metaphorical thinking practice is easier or harder moving from what we were looking at in terms of 4 corners, 4 different options, to the example here where, okay, in your experience, and your experience is highlighted, and I always point out to learners, we all have had yes, we may have just had the same lesson, but each of us experienced it differently. So in your experience, which metaphor, eating food or doing some gardening, is a better representation of what learning feels like? So now we've moved to either or. And I think sometimes, we think, oh, well, we've eliminated choice. That means it should be easier. But I don't know, Jeff, what do you think? Is this then an easier exercise of metaphorical thinking or more complicated?
I don't know. I think, I think it's harder. And I think it's harder in a couple different things. One, you've reduced what you can choose, but now you're really asking, that idea of to your saying, like either or, right? Like you have to pick one and then tell me how that represents it. And the fewer choices you have, there's this really interesting spot between giving people too much choice. And I'm thinking like the cereal aisle in a grocery store, way too much choice. Like who needs that much cereal, right? Like just give me 4 or give me 2. And you can still make the choice that's best for you. And that's the key, I think, is trying to figure out the balance. It doesn't have to be 2 or 4. It could be 3. Maybe that's the right number for your class. But do know that there's this, the less numbers there are, the more you push people into a category. But the thing I love about this, and you pointed this out, is you and I both could say, we believe learning is best represented by doing yard work. But the way we explain that connection in our mind might be completely different. And that gets conversation started, right? It's this conversation of like, I never thought about that, thought about learning that way. I never thought about the image that way. Or you're going to point out something in the image that I didn't see that makes me even go cognitively deeper in understanding my own thinking around what does learning feel like. And it seems it's so powerful and such a simple things that we can do in the classroom.
And it's about slowing down. You mentioned that idea of, we would point out to one another what we might notice, and you have to slow down and look closely. And, I think when we're talking about literacy, That's hugely important, right? Like we want students to have had multiple opportunities to practice, just slow down, get curious. And a follow-up question I would ask is, how does the metaphor on the left change if it's not salad, if it's not something healthy?
Ooh, great idea.
If she had had, I don't know, cake and ice cream instead, would that change your answer? Does that change the metaphor? If the image on the right, if instead of it being kind of like a sunny day,
Yeah.
how does that change it?
Yeah.
So again, I think it's in those details and those practices of, let's slow down, let's appreciate what's here and really think critically about it. That to me is the other power of it. So, again, there's another example of an either or, and again, focusing on experience. Which metaphor is a better representation of what collaboration feels like? And Jeff, I know that you and I have talked about this a lot, because I think it's very easy to operate sometimes from the stance of, school is social. We are in a place now where, I think doing collaborative learning is an expectation, but we have to be really careful in not assuming that everybody just likes learning that way.
So true. And trying to figure out ways to get student voice. We're always talking about ways to get student voice in our classroom. And I'm even thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about this, we still have some classrooms where the students are virtual, and you could use these as a way, just like kids can either unmute themselves and tell you, but a lot of kids we find, would rather talk in a chat, and that's okay too, right? It's all about getting that communication out. And asking questions like this, like, do you like to collaborate? Like, you might get some interesting questions where kids are like, no, I just want to be the piece of the noodle in the bottom of the bowl that nobody ever talks to. Like, I don't want to collaborate. I just like, give me my stuff. Let me do my stuff. I just want to sit in the sauce and be a noodle. Like, don't make me talk to others. But, if you start getting that conversation out in your classroom, then you can start to support kids who maybe don't like to collaborate or don't know how to collaborate in the classroom. And we could dig into that, but that's a whole nother talk on why this generation sometimes has a hard time collaborating. They haven't had the same experiences we did growing up. So.
And moving on. So again, it's the subtle shifts here that I think make some of these metaphorical thinking activities different. And, in my mind, it's not pick one and do that. It's mix it up, keep it fresh. So you'll notice here, it's not which corner is, the closest representation or the strongest connection, but now it's tell me which one is the least. So when we talk about facilitating change, when we talk about managing change, which one is least representative of the way that you approach leading that change? And again, I find it's really interesting sometimes to switch it up a little bit and kind of do the whole, which one of these things doesn't belong in our, according to our question. Again, just to sort of keep the exercise fresh, but also just, have a completely different way of looking at it. The thing that I do like doing, not always, but when I've done this activity, is then, are there any themes across the group or across the class? Because that's really interesting data, in my mind, to find out, did everybody have the same least one? And what is that saying?
Well, I think it can also just give you a lot of insight into classroom culture, right? Like, where are you? What's going on? But yeah, I love it. You change one word, and all of a sudden now, instead of choosing one, I'm actually choosing three and eliminating one. And I have to go even deeper. Like, to me, this is even harder than the four corners where I have to choose one, or there's only two choices, because now I have to somehow rationale to myself what three actually make sense and which one should be ousted. Right. And that to me is just it's another level of just cognitive flexibility that our students need to be able to have.
That's, you absolutely just, nail right on the head there. When we flip this question a little bit, you do have to carefully consider each one. And so I should mention, when I do this, to avoid the bandwagon effect that can happen in classes. So, if we're all in a class and Jeff answers first, everybody might just jump on his answer and say, oh yeah. It's the planting seeds is the one, and then end of conversation. So often what I'll do is we have some think time. Either students have, they've written down their answer, Or again, if we're virtual, I'll say, type it in a different space, and then 3, 2, 1, we're going to copy it into the chat. So it's not necessarily just one person's answered and then we're all just going to agree with that person. I find that's, just again, in terms of facilitating it, to really make sure everybody's kind of thinking about their personal experience. It's that lead time. Again, I mentioned that sometimes I'll do these like 30 to 60 seconds, but if I'm just starting this kind of activity with students, I'll let them know the day before we're going to talk about this. So just give it a few minutes, talk it over.
Depending on the age of the kids, I think you could do this, maybe even like scaffold it into a small group as first. Like if you've got kids sitting in a pod or, you've got teams, share it with your elbow partner before you share it out loud. It just gives kids a little more privacy to try it out, see what the reactions are before they're willing to share at class. How long, like in the classroom, like from beginning to end, what are you thinking as far as like think time to write it down, maybe time to share either in small group or you to have a conversation as a teacher with a large group? How much class time, Tricia, do you think like you'd spend on one of these?
I think it always depends. And one of the big factors is how much rehearsal or practice time have learners had with it? Because, again, if they've never done an exercise like this before, I'm always going to take more time on it in the beginning. And then I find, we can speed up with practice, like everything. But I would also say that sometimes this works as a really interesting bookend, like both as an entry ticket and an exit ticket. So I might have students just, the question is there when they come up. It's, it's being displayed. It's right there. And we're going to take maybe 90 seconds, think about it, record your answer, maybe just write it down. Don't share it with anybody yet, and come back to it at the end of the lesson. I might save the last 3 to 5 minutes of that lesson to then, like you said, I do think it's really great to share in partners or small groups first, and then maybe do a little bit of a debrief. Maybe that whole, okay, like quick showing of hands, how many people pick the DJ? Yeah. And then even just asking the class, if there is a really popular choice, why do you think that is? Or it might even be, let's talk about that tomorrow, or let's talk about that next lesson.
Have you ever done it where you have the kids like the quick 3 to 5 minutes at the start as like, students coming in, and then you do the lesson and then have them revisit it at the end to see if anything's changed after the lesson?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And I kind of think, again, depending on what's going on, sometimes we're going to revisit it at the end of the lesson, or let's revisit it at the end of the week. And again, just giving those reminders throughout the week, like, remember that question? We're going to see if anything's changed or stayed the same when we touch base. Or again, maybe this is up for the first 3 to 5 minutes of the lesson. And then if I'm conferencing with students one-to-one or in small groups, instead of them sharing out to the whole class, this might be the thing that we're talking about when I'm just having sort of those smaller mentorship conversations.
I love that. Like if you're doing station rotation or something in your classroom, this is the thing you bring to the station, and I can have that quicker one-on-one. And again, right, you have some kids that don't like to share out. So bring it to our small group and let's discuss this. Which one did you pick, or which one is the least representative, or however you framed it. Bring that. Let's use that as our starter as we're talking about whatever the subject or class or thing that we're doing. I love that idea.
Jeff, I'm really glad that you brought up that whole, the dynamic of sharing. I think it's always really important to completely be transparent. If something is going to be shared whole class, I always say that. Yeah. If it's sort of the, you and I are maybe just going to have a conversation about this, I'm explicit about that, because we're the same as adult learners, right? Like there's different things that we will share in different settings. Right. And so even being explicit about that, okay, now that this is going to be a whole class share, what are some of the things that and it's, you're making that decision yourself. And I think sometimes we even see adults in our digital ecosystem where it's did you think about what that means to share that publicly? Right. So true. So it's, again, it's a decision-making lesson, I think. And, again, for what we were saying with, if it's blended learning, station rotations, this is a really great little coaching tool for some students who maybe don't feel that connected to me yet. And that's another learning, I think, as a veteran educator, is some students, yeah, some students may not connect with us, but
Mm.
can we, give them something rather than just the, hey, tell me how you doing, how you feeling about the homework, how giving them a different opportunity, a different avenue to communicate with you, I find is always, always better than the generic, you want to talk about anything,
Yeah.
is everything all right? Like that often,
Yeah. How are
you
you
know,
doing today?
crickets to
Right.
that. So now that we've gone through those, and again, those are all there in that folder. So if I was facilitating this with my class and saying, we're trying to gather, like, what is our team vision? What do we want to be our metaphor, either for our class, or maybe if I've got groups in my class or my PLC, this document then, and again, if you click on the little yellow folder, that gives you your own copy of this. This would be something that we would go away, we would work on separately in our own time. So Jeff and I might be on the same document, but we both have a few days to kind of tap in and add to this. I'll mention at the bottom, again, there's further research there that talks a little bit about metaphorical thinking, why it's useful, why it's a great tool for communication. But this would be kind of like our planning document, because it's important to think, again, like we were saying at the beginning, that idea of being culturally responsive, which metaphors are more likely to, connect with our audience? What's in our local environment? Jeff, I will never forget like the amazing Apple story that you've told me about Washington, inventing the cosmic crisp. Like, again, just kind of thinking about what are some of the inventions that are local that have that deep resonance with, and when are you going to share it? With whom? What other metaphors have resonated in our community? All communities have a mascot. So do you want it to be connected to your school's mascot in some way?
No, that's a great
Um,
idea.
and again, it's kind of like another noticing thing. So this would be the space where I'm doing my rough draft thinking.
Yeah. Full disclosure too, Tricia, the first cosmic crisp apples of the year just hit the supermarkets.
Oh, incredible. Okay.
So hopefully you find one this year.
I was not able to find one last year, but I will be sure to keep asking around. And I'm curious, Jeff, you'll have to let me know like price point for them too. Are they more expensive than the other? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, I would take my team through that just kind of as a practicing rough draft. And hopefully we've got an idea. So then if we're going to follow through with the scent of the idea, our free guide, Finding Your Metaphor for the Moment, takes you through and really expands on the metaphor. And again, to get to the guide, you tap on this yellow folder here. And it kind of works just with baseball. So it picks one sport, it looks at some of the terminology there, and again, kind of moves past just the metaphor and looks into having a deeper definition. So what I mean by that, just to sort of take a look at it, is again, batting practice. So familiar to anybody who's played baseball, this idea that I just get to take swing after swing. So for our learning community, when do we get to just practice, not necessarily like swinging for the fences, going for the home run, but just trying to get into the flow of the motion. And again, there's a resource there linked onto the plus. Extend this metaphor by ways hitters need to prepare to swing and rely sometimes on muscle memory and intuition. So again, it might be an interesting conversation to have with my PLC. What are we doing that's just based on instinct right now? What are some of the things that we might be assuming just because it's like in our muscle memory that this is what we assume about our school culture, about the ways in which we go about learning together. So our free guide here kind of takes you through how you might play around with a metaphor, come up with a question for it, and then extend it. And again, in this example, it's baseball. Jeff and I both love baseball, so it works for us. Again, you've got to find that metaphor that really works for your community. I think that personal local connection, we've talked about it a lot, and that's because it's super powerful. It's really, really important to be thinking about it.
Yeah, inviting student culture into your classroom. Figure out what drives your kids. We talk a lot about engagement. And I think a lot of times we forget that piece. we worry or we think about what engages us as a teacher, which is great, and not that you shouldn't, but we also have to remember that, these kids come from a different time and place, and they play different games, and they have different experiences from us. What is it that we can invite in and use in some of these ways that make a huge impact, small adjustments that make a huge impact in our classrooms and in learning.
And I think it's sometimes nice to, okay, we've got this example, and you brought up Fortnite earlier.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, like when the Fortnite craze first hit, I really didn't understand it. And then again, it was just sort of taking that time to talk to a few students and have them explain, like, no, because, this can happen. And then there's this. So, it might even be, okay, when we think about this example, what's the equivalent in that game or in that setting? And again, it's also just a way to find out, like, why is this thing that learners in my classroom are obsessed with? What's going on there? Because I think sometimes it's easy as an adult to be like, oh, that's just a silly game. And that's what adults may have done, with our passions.
So true.
But thankfully I have always been surprised and amazed to be like, actually, that's really, really cool. So just making space for those conversations is huge. On the next slide, you will find, if you just wanted to play around with the batting practice idea, when you click on that card is made in Canva. Canva is free for educators everywhere, which is pretty amazing. You can go ahead and just play around with this one example. So if you don't want to make sort of the 10 different examples of the metaphor and the extended, but you want to start with one thing, we've given you that just as a free template to play around with. And again, if I were working with my PLC, I could see that being a really great exercise to have everybody, maybe you've got 2 weeks, 3 weeks to think about, what is our team metaphor? What is something that's part of our team identity? Come up with a question for it. Give me a resource that extends the metaphor. And really just kind of follow this formula and have folks bring their draft together to have a conversation about. So that's what that free template is there to do, is hopefully, again, to give community some practice time with it. And then I think that's a great follow-up conversation potentially for teams to have. So we always love hearing from our audience. Our podcast listeners, our newsletter subscribers are great about getting into our inbox. So if you are watching this webinar and you're thinking, okay, I am going to go through any of those activities with learners in my context, we would love to hear from you at info@shiftingschools.com. And we also want to mention that, it's useful. Jeff and I were kind of waxing poetic about this, but we have a special podcast episode that's linked in here on this slide as well, where we have a whole panel of guests talking about their metaphor for the year. And I just find that really, really powerful to listen to others and, how they're kind of shaping out their vision and the examples that they give for the power of metaphor. So I don't know, Jeff, about you, but it's one of my favorite episodes, I think, from this academic school year so far.
Yeah, I agree. And I think part of it is like we have heads of school talking about the metaphor they're using to lay out a plan for their school. And we've got like an elementary school primary grade teacher saying, here's how she uses metaphors in her classroom. And so you just see how this whole thing, like, it's good for all of us to think in metaphoric terms. So it's so good cognitively and such a creative space to put our students in. So it's great. Yeah. Check out the episode. It's really good. One of my favorites for sure.
I love, Jeff, that you bring up the head of school who shares her metaphor. She actually tells quite a personal story about like the first job that she had before she entered into education. And again, I think that's why I really like this as an idea. I feel like it's a intentional slippery slope into storytelling. And I just kind of think, we don't necessarily do enough of that in schools, finding out a little bit about one another's experiences. And that truly is the glue to community. So that would be, check out that episode as further inspiration, maybe to practice doing metaphorical thinking in your community. And if you liked the free guide that we were taking you through today, over at shiftingschools.com, when you hit the resources tab and you go to the free library, We now have, I think it is 60 different free guides for you to pick from. Again, the vast majority of these have been based on requests from educators. So if you have a request for a free guide, please do reach out to info@shiftingschools.com.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Tricia, so much. Again, you can head over to shiftingschools.com. Tricia's done an incredible job of making all these free resources as our creative content director, just trying to meet the needs of educators this school year, as we are still, very much in the middle of a pandemic. School is not quote unquote normal yet for the majority of us globally. And just trying to find ways to really tap into kids. And one of the reasons why we like this one is because it really is that social emotional learning. How are you doing today? Gets you one answer. Asking kids to make connections via an image gives you a whole nother space to start having conversations around feelings and where are you at mentally, and how are things truly going in something then fine, I'm okay, great. We want to get deeper than that with our kiddos. That's what true social emotional learning means. And so just some great ways, hopefully, that you can take an idea here back to your classroom. And please do let us know. All the information is there. Reach out to us and let us know how we can help you in the future as well. So thank you, Tricia, for taking time out of your busy schedule. I appreciate it. And it's great to be here. We're hoping to do more of these. So please do let us know if you like these. Over on Twitter, you can hit us up at Shifting Schools and let us know. And we would love to do more of these free webinars live on YouTube. So,
Jeff, always a pleasure. And, again, if you are looking to hear more from Jeff, because I there are a few people who are as inspiring to listen to as you are, Jeff. The podcast has changed schedule and it's coming out every Monday morning now. So if you're leaving this webinar and you want to check that out, when you go to Shifting Our Schools podcast, you'll be able to find the freshest podcast episode that also has another really great panel of guests to listen to.
Yeah. And they all have our free resources based off free resources in the library. So trying to bring things together for you all. So awesome. Thanks, Tricia. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.